Morning settled gray over Gary, Indiana. Cold light slid across rows of boarded-up homes and the skeletal frame of an old garage the city had finally condemned. Diesel engines idled, coughing in the air. A demolition crew in hard hats swapped jokes through their radios, boots sinking into frost-crusted gravel. To them, it was just another teardown, another forgotten structure erased to make room for progress. No one imagined history was waiting beneath the concrete. At 9:12 a.m., the excavator's bucket bit into the slab and shuddered. The vibration climbed up the machine's arm like a heartbeat gone wrong. The operator frowned. He'd spent 20 years breaking concrete, and this felt different, thicker, denser, almost hollow underneath. He pulled the lever back, dust swirling like smoke from a gun barrel. When the haze cleared, something caught the light, curved metal, a sliver of glass. He killed the engine. Silence rolled in so quickly it felt heavy. The crew gathered around the hole. One man crouched, brushing away the rubble with his gloved hand. "Not rebar," he said quietly. Another leaned closer. Beneath the cement, a smooth panel arced upward, painted once in dark burgundy, now dulled to rusted brown. A few inches more and the outline became impossible to mistake. Roofline, windshield frame, the faint shine of chrome. "Is that a car?" someone whispered. The foreman radioed the city supervisor, voice low but urgent. Work halted. The men stood in a semicircle, staring at the impossible, the top of a vehicle buried 11 feet beneath a garage floor. Within the hour, patrol cars arrived. Yellow tape went up. Detective Lisa Moore stepped from her unmarked sedan, the chill wind tugging at her coat. She'd expected an old crime scene, maybe an illegal dump site. What she found looked nothing like either. A dented roof protruded from the concrete pit, coated in decades of dust, yet still gleaming faintly under the sun. A worker pointed toward a section of exposed grill where the soil had fallen away. The chrome bar carried an insignia she hadn't seen in years, an elegant R enclosed in a winged crest. "Ryley RMA," the foreman said, reading it aloud. "British car, late 40s, maybe early 50s. Moore crouched, studying the contours. The headlight stared back like eyes half closed in sleep. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this," she murmured. She traced her glove along the cracked windshield, noting how the frame around it was welded into the surrounding concrete, not crushed by it. Whoever buried this car hadn't simply dumped it. They'd entombed it. The cement had been poured deliberately over the vehicle, layer by layer, sealing it in like a time capsule. The excavator operator approached, still unsettled. "You can feel two different pours," he said. "The top layer's newer, maybe a few months after the bottom one. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Moore nodded slowly. Construction experience or a cover-up. Technicians from the forensic unit arrived with cameras and floodlights. They photographed every angle while Moore kept her distance, notebook in hand. The smell of cold cement and diesel mixed with something older, metallic, faintly sweet, the scent that escapes when the earth gives up what it's been guarding too long. A younger officer broke the silence. "Think it's a dump job? Maybe stolen?" Moore didn't answer right away. She looked at the immaculate symmetry of the burial, the concrete perfectly level except for the section fractured by the excavator. "No thief spends a week pouring 11 feet of concrete to hide a car," she said. "This was meant to stay invisible." She stepped back as a forensic light swept across the exposed front. The beam caught the grill again, revealing the full badge, Ryley RMA Saloon. The letters gleamed through decades of dust like they'd been waiting for this exact moment to be read aloud again. A hum of quiet awe spread through the workers. Even the seasoned demolition crew felt the weight of it. They'd uncovered artifacts before: bottles, coins, old tools, but never something like this. The idea that a car, whole and heavy as a secret, had been resting beneath their feet for generations made the air feel electric. Moore turned to her partner. "Get the registration number as soon as we can see it, and call the Historical Vehicle Registry in Indianapolis. If this thing's local, we'll find a name attached." On it, she took one last look into the pit before walking back toward her car. Behind her, floodlights flickered to life, bathing the buried Ryley in white glow. The car's chrome reflected tiny shards of light around the chamber like a mirror ball at a ghost's dance. Something about the stillness bothered her. The way dust hung suspended, how even the wind seemed to avoid crossing the yellow tape. This wasn't just an abandoned relic. It was a story that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to silence. The detective closed her notebook, eyes narrowing. "Get the ground-penetrating radar out here," she said quietly. "If there's a car, there might be more." The operator hesitated. "You think there's someone inside?" Moore didn't look up. "I think whoever buried a Ryley RMA 11 feet down didn't do it for storage." She walked away as the floodlights brightened, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "They thought it was just an old car," she said. "They were wrong." Floodlights bathed the dig site in pale gold, turning the shattered concrete into a field of dull silver. The Ryley RMA sat half liberated from the earth, its burgundy and black paint mottled with 70 years of dust. The detective stood quietly, breath steaming in the cold air as the forensic crew moved like surgeons, brushes, scalpels, and patience their only tools. Every few minutes, someone would stop and just look at it. The car didn't appear crushed or rusted beyond recognition. Instead, it looked placed there, like a prized artifact sealed away from time itself. Its long hood still curved gracefully, and the once polished chrome trim caught the light, whispering of another era. Detective Lisa Moore leaned closer as a technician scraped dirt from the rear bumper. Letters appeared one by one as if the car was spelling out its secret: RYLEYRMA. The final layer of grime revealed a license plate. Indiana tags, faint but intact. "Get me the number," Moore said. "Let's see who owned it." The technician called it out, voice low. Moore jotted it down, radio dispatch, and within minutes, the database returned something that made the entire team fall silent. The car was registered to Samuel Ryley, born 1928. Occupation, machinist at the Gary shipyard. Military service, U.S. Army, Korean War veteran. Status, missing since August 14th, 1956. Moore exhaled. The coincidence of the name, Ryley owning a Ryley, felt almost poetic, but the file attached to the registration was anything but romantic. Samuel hadn't been seen for nearly 70 years. The team exchanged glances. One of the younger officers frowned. Could this really be that Ryley, the one who just vanished? "Same make, same year," Moore said quietly, "and the same town." She crouched near the front fender where the serial number plate was riveted to the frame. "Get the chassis number clean," she told the technician. "I want confirmation." When the final digits came into view, they matched the historical record exactly. There was no mistake. This was his car. By mid-afternoon, the Ryley's doors had been carefully pried open. A hiss escaped, the sound of trapped air escaping decades of stillness. The interior was dark and stale, the smell thick and sour. Dust fell from the seats like powder, drifting in the floodlight beams. Inside, Everything was eerily intact. The wooden dash faded but unbroken, the steering wheel cracked in one clean line across the center, the clock on the dashboard frozen at 8:17. Sealed, the lead technician murmured. No water intrusion. Whoever buried it, they made sure it would last. Moore leaned in through the window. The leather seats had hardened into shapes that still hinted at the man who once drove them. A cap lay on the passenger side floor. Gray wool, army issue. Get it bagged, she said softly. The camera flashes flickered again, and for a second, the interior looked alive, like someone might open the door, start the engine, and drive out into the Indiana night. Later that evening, Moore sat in the mobile command van, screen glow soft against her tired face. The database brought up an old black and white photograph attached to the missing person file. Samuel Ryley, 27, short hair, confident half smile, standing beside a freshly waxed two-tone Ryley RMA. The same car now sitting 10 yards away, exhumed from 11 feet of concrete. The caption read, "Veteran buys his dream car after service in Korea." Another photo, this one yellowed and scanned from a local newspaper. It showed Samuel with his younger sister, both smiling in front of a modest home. The article headline, "Local Veteran Celebrates Return to Normal Life." Moore read the old text aloud, her voice low. He didn't crave luxury. The Ryley was his reward for surviving. There was something simple, almost heartbreaking in that line. After years of chaos, the car had been his proof that peace was possible, his small piece of the life he'd fought for overseas. Moore scrolled further down. Another quote from his sister, written decades ago when hope was still alive. "My brother never ran from anything." The words lingered in the cold air of the van. Outside, floodlights still burned, and the Ryley gleamed faintly under them, half buried, half reborn. She stared at the photo again, then at the live feed from the dig site on her tablet. The two-tone body, the rounded headlights, it all matched perfectly. But one thing didn't. In the photo, the car's license plate was mounted at the back. The one they found at the site was in front. Someone had removed it and reattached it. That detail bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She stepped out into the cold, pulling her coat tighter, and looked down at the exposed car. Workers had covered it with a tarp to protect it overnight, but its shape still bulged beneath the fabric, familiar, human almost. The wind stirred, lifting the edge of the tarp for a second, revealing the chrome emblem glinting beneath the light. Moore whispered, almost to herself, "If his car was here, where was Samuel?" The camera slowly pans up from the tarp-covered car to the dark outline of the demolished garage behind it. The ground looks calm again, too calm. Night settles over Gary, Indiana, 1956. The air hums with factory whistles and the soft static of jazz leaking from open diner doors. Neon lights bleed across wet asphalt. It's a Friday evening, the end of another long week for men who've spent their days beneath the roar of steel and smoke. Among them is Samuel Ryley, 27 years old, machinist, veteran, and dreamer of quieter days. He walks out of the Gary shipyard, lunch pail in hand, shirt sleeves rolled up, grease marking his knuckles like badges of survival. The shift whistle fades behind him. His co-workers call out, "See you Monday, Sam," and he raises a hand in his usual modest wave. But a few men notice something different tonight. Samuel doesn't smile back. His eyes dart toward the far corner of the yard, where a dark sedan idles with its lights off. "Everything all right?" a foreman calls. "Yeah," Samuel answers too quickly. "Just tired." He crosses the lot toward his car, the Ryley RMA, parked neatly where it always is. Its two-tone body gleams under the shipyard floodlights, burgundy and black, still proud despite the layer of grime from long drives and late nights. To him, it's more than a car. It's freedom on four wheels, a reminder that he came home, that not all stories end in foxholes and fire. He slides into the driver's seat and rests for a moment, hands on the wheel. The dashboard clock ticks faintly. Outside, steam rises from a manhole, curling around the hood like breath on cold glass. He glances in the rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights blink on, then off again. Samuel exhales slowly, starts the engine, and the Ryley answers with that deep, confident growl, the straight six engine that had earned it a reputation for smooth grace and power. The sound turns heads every time it leaves the lot, but tonight it feels different. Lonely, maybe even final. At the Harbor Diner a few miles down the road, waitress Mabel Green is refilling coffee for the night regulars when Samuel walks in. She knows him by sight, though not by name. Quiet man, polite. Always orders black coffee and a slice of apple pie. But tonight he doesn't sit in his usual booth. He takes the corner one, far from the windows. He checks his watch twice, glancing toward the door each time it opens. Mabel notices the tension in his shoulders, the way he keeps his jacket zipped even though the diner's warm. She walks over. "Long day, hun?" Samuel nods faintly. "Something like that." "Pie?" she offers, smiling. He hesitates, then shakes his head. "Just coffee tonight. I'm meeting someone." She pours the cup, the dark liquid rippling under the fluorescent light. "Girlfriend?" she teases gently. He almost smiles. "No, not this time." Minutes pass. No one else comes in. Outside, rain taps softly against the glass. Mabel wipes down the counter, humming to the radio. Sinatra's "In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning" plays softly in the background. When she looks up again, Samuel's gone. The cup still half full, the doorbell still swaying from his exit. She'll remember that moment for the rest of her life. The quiet man who left without a word, as if chased by something unseen. Later, in the neighborhood where he rents a small apartment, a few locals remember seeing the Ryley RMA glide past just after dusk. The streetlights caught the wet sheen of its paint, turning it into a moving ribbon of color. Mr. Johnston, the old postman who lived across the street, would tell police that Samuel waved once as he passed, though he couldn't be sure if it was goodbye or habit. Inside his apartment, the evening was left in perfect order. Bed made, work clothes pressed, lunch pail cleaned, and drying in the sink. On the small kitchen table, an envelope addressed to Clara Whitmore, his fiancée, sat beneath a brass paperweight. It contained a short note. "I'll be by after the shift Friday. We'll talk about the house in Merrillville. Don't stay up too late." Clara never received it. At 7:46 p.m., a neighbor named Helen McKay heard the low hum of the Ryleys' engine outside her window. She looked out just in time to see the car's headlights cutting through the mist, reflecting off the puddles that dotted Madison Street. The sound faded into the distance, swallowed by the rain. That was the last confirmed sighting. The next morning, the Ryley was gone. So was Samuel. In the weeks that followed, detectives interviewed everyone, co-workers, friends, Clara. They learned that Samuel had seemed different in his final days, more alert, distracted, often pausing mid-conversation as though listening for something. A friend recalled him saying, "Sometimes you don't have to go back to war for the war to find you." He never explained what he meant. Whatever haunted him, he kept it to himself. Yet he was planning for the future, paying deposits, choosing paint colors, writing letters to Clara about a fresh start. His life wasn't one of a man ready to disappear. Detective Moore's narration fades in softly over the present-day image of the recovered Ryley RMA under bright forensic lights. Every missing person has a last moment that someone remembers, a wave, a laugh, a sound in the dark. For Samuel Ryley, it was the steady hum of an engine that should have carried him home, but didn't. As her words linger, we return to the 1956 night, the Ryleys' headlights gliding down a rain-slicked road, reflecting in a shop window as it passes. The jazz fades, replaced by silence. The taillights grow smaller, smaller, until they vanish into the dark. The headlights vanished into the night and never returned. The film turns black and white. Rain trickles down the windshield of a patrol car as its wipers drag back and forth with weary rhythm. The headlights cut through the fog of a late August morning, 1955. On the radio, static hums between bursts of police chatter, routine calls, nothing urgent. To most, Samuel Ryley's disappearance is just another line in a report waiting to be forgotten. But for his family, the silence is already unbearable. When Samuel failed to show up for work on Monday, his supervisor called his small apartment on Madison Street. No answer. A coworker stopped by around noon, expecting maybe a hangover or a flat tire. Instead, he found the apartment spotless. His jacket hung neatly by the door. His lunch pail was sitting empty on the counter, washed and drying. On the dresser lay his wallet, his watch, and the spare ignition key to the Ryley. No signs of struggle, no note, no man. By the time his mother, Eleanor Ryley, arrived that evening, she already knew in her heart this wasn't a misunderstanding. Her son was gone. At the Gary Police Department, a desk sergeant took her statement, chewing gum as he typed. "When did you last see him, ma'am?" "Saturday afternoon," she said softly. "He came for dinner. Said he'd be back tomorrow." The officer nodded without looking up. "Any reason he might have left town? Girlfriend trouble? Debt?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "He's a good man, Sergeant. He doesn't run from anything." The sergeant sighed, more bored than cruel. "Sometimes people just need to get away. Happens more than you think." He stamped the report. Missing, possibly voluntary days passed, then weeks. The Ryleys' registration was flagged at every checkpoint, but it never turned up. No accidents reported, no abandoned vehicles, no trace in junkyards or scrapyards. It was as if both man and machine had evaporated. The family filed letters, called every sheriff's office in the surrounding counties. Nothing. Detectives combed through rivers, canals, warehouses, and forest trails with volunteers. Divers searched the Little Calumet River twice that fall, dragging up bicycles, shopping carts, and rusted car parts, but never Samuel's Ryley RMA. Each lead ended in silence. At home, Eleanor Ryley left the porch light on every night. The same small white bulb burned through rain and snow year after year. Neighbors whispered that it had become a landmark, the veteran's mother's light. Children walking home from school would look toward that little house on the corner and whisper stories about the soldier who vanished with his fancy car. But to Eleanor, that light was prayer made visible. In the living room, she kept his army photograph framed on the mantel. Samuel in uniform, standing tall, a shy smile on his face. On some nights, she'd sit beside it, reading his last letter from Korea over and over until her hands trembled. "I'll be home soon, Ma. When I get back, I'm buying something with 4 wheels and a little dignity." The Ryley RMA had been that promise fulfilled, and now it was gone too. By winter, investigators had exhausted every angle. Without foul play evidence, no body, no witnesses, the case cooled. 1956 became 1957, and the Ryley file slid deeper into the cabinet, covered in the dust of new crimes. Newspaper headlines shrank from veteran missing with car to no leads in Gary disappearance, then stopped altogether. The years that followed turned Samuel's story into a ghost at family gatherings. His younger sister married, moved away, and had children who only knew Uncle Sam from black and white photos. Eleanor aged quickly, the hope in her eyes thinning like paper. Neighbors would still see that porch light glow every night. She never replaced it with a stronger bulb, even when it flickered. "He'll recognize it that way," she told them once. In the culture of the 1950s, veterans were expected to be silent survivors. Men returned from battle with nightmares, tremors, and faces hollowed by what they'd seen. But there was no name for what broke inside them. No therapy, no diagnosis. They were told to man up, to move on, to be grateful they came home at all. Samuel tried. He built a quiet life, worked hard, smiled for photographs. But beneath it all, the war still whispered. When he vanished, some whispered that maybe the past had finally claimed him, that he'd walked away to escape something no one could understand. But Eleanor refused to believe it. In a rare 1958 interview with the Gary Post-Tribune, she sat by her living room window, that same porch light glowing behind her. "People say he left, but my son didn't run," she told the reporter. "If he was alive, he'd have called. Something happened. Someone knows." The article ran once, then disappeared from circulation. Just another mother refusing to let go. Still, the quote lingered, passed quietly between detectives through the years. Someone knows. Back in the present, 2024, Detective Lisa Moore stands at the edge of the excavation site, reading that very article on her tablet. The photo shows Eleanor at 60, lines of grief etched across her face. The caption beneath her porch light reads, "A mother's vigil continues." Moore closes the file and looks at the half-exhumed Ryley RMA, its headlights shattered, its steel bones finally breathing air again. The echo of that old quote rings in her head. "Someone knows," she whispers to herself. Someone in that shipyard knew why a good man and his car had to vanish. The camera pans slowly over the car's exposed frame as the rain begins to fall again, just like it did that night in 1956. Floodlights burned through the mist like miniature suns. The dig site looked less like a demolition zone now and more like an archaeological excavation. The Ryley RMA sat half exhumed, its body glistening under the cold white glare, streaked with dust and sweat from the men who refused to look away. It was close to midnight. The noise of the city had gone silent. All that remained was the rhythmic scrape of trowels and the hum of portable generators keeping the lights alive. Each sound echoed against the surrounding concrete like the heartbeat of something ancient. Detective Lisa Moore stood just beyond the perimeter tape, hands in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the ghost of a car that refused to stay buried. The Ryley's roof had been cleared completely, its glass long since shattered, its elegant curves warped by time but unmistakably dignified. The men who built it in Coventry, England, almost 80 years earlier, could never have imagined that their work would one day be exhumed from a tomb of American concrete. A forensic technician named Rodriguez called out softly from inside the pit. "Ma'am, we're opening the rear compartment." Moore nodded. "Do it slow. Photograph everything first." The trunk creaked as it lifted. The smell that escaped was sharp: metal, oil, earth, and something faintly sweet with decay. Inside lay a collapsed lining of rotted carpet and the brittle remains of what might once have been tools or something heavier. Rodriguez shone his flashlight over the interior. "We've got a toolbox here," he said, "old rusted shut." He lifted it carefully, setting it on a tarp. The hinges gave way with a brittle snap, revealing a scattering of corroded wrenches and sockets. Beneath them, wrapped in an oil-stained rag, was a military dog tag, the metal still legible through the grime. Moore crouched beside it, reading aloud. "Ryley, Samuel, U.S. Army, serial numbers 2137428. The tag was genuine. It wasn't just his car down there, it was him. Next to the tag lay a small tin, crushed slightly, but still sealed. A technician eased it open with surgical tweezers. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a folded photograph. It showed a young man in a crisp shirt standing beside the same two-tone car, one hand resting proudly on the roof, the other holding a woman's hand. The edges were browned from time, but the smiles were unmistakable. Moore stared at it in silence. "He wasn't lost to time," she whispered. "He was preserved by it." By 2 a.m., the recovery had shifted from mechanical work to delicate science. Every inch of soil was sifted, every scrap of debris cataloged. Beneath the car's undercarriage, the ground told its own story. Dr. Patricia Hale, a forensic geologist assisting the team, ran her gloved fingers along the exposed cross-section of concrete and dirt. "You see this?" she said, pointing to a thin, darker layer in the profile. "This section here is from the original slab, probably poured when the garage was first built, late 40s. But this one," she tapped the newer, lighter layer above it, "was poured months, maybe a year later. Completely different mix, higher cement ratio. This was intentional." Moore's brow furrowed. "Someone added another floor?" Hale shook her head. "Not a floor, a seal. Whoever buried this didn't just dig a hole. They poured an entire second foundation to hide it." The detective straightened slowly. "Meaning they had the equipment and the expertise. And likely worked construction," Hale added. "You'd need the tools, the concrete truck, and the know-how to pull this off without anyone noticing." Moore looked back at the car. The headlights, though shattered, still caught glints of light, like eyes pleading to be recognized. She turned to her partner, Detective Crane, who was reviewing property files on his tablet. "What's the address again?" 847 Monroe Street, he said. "Records show the original permit for the garage was filed in 1947, but there's a second permit here too." Moore stepped closer. "Second?" "Yeah. Foundation reinforcement, issued in late 56. On the same year Samuel vanished." She took the tablet, scrolling down. The name attached to the permit made her heart jolt. "Property owner, Edward Caro. Occupation, supervisor, Gary Shipyard." A long silence fell between them, broken only by the distant whine of the generator. Moore felt a cold wave settle in her chest. Caro. The name was already familiar, mentioned briefly in the old 1956 police reports as Samuel's foreman, one of the last people to see him alive. He'd been interviewed once, then dismissed. No criminal record, no motive back then. But now, with a buried car and a second concrete pour, his name read like a confession carved in stone. Moore exhaled almost to herself. He wasn't hiding a car. He was hiding what was inside it. Crane looked at her, uneasy. "You think Ryley's body's still in there?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the half-buried Ryley RMA, its steel frame slick with moisture and memory. "After 70 years underground," she said quietly, "I think this car is about to start talking." She glanced again at the permit date glowing on the tablet screen, October 1956. 2 months after Samuel disappeared, Moore closed the file and handed the tablet back. "Get me everything on Edward Caro. Employment, property, descendants, all of it. I want his name in every database by morning. She turned back toward the dig site. The night air had grown colder, the kind that seeps through gloves and skin into bone. As she watched the forensic team work, she could feel the story uncoiling, layer by layer, just like the concrete. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the entire excavation site under floodlights, a ring of white tents surrounding a single ghostly relic of metal and a glass. The narrator's voice fades in. Time doesn't forget, it only buries, and sometimes concrete remembers more than the people who poured it. Detective Moore looks down into the pit one last time before stepping away. And one man on record, she murmurs, had both the knowledge and the reason. The camera opens on faded blueprints spread across a desk, their corners curled, the paper yellowed to the color of old bone. Fingerprints, oil smudges, and decades of dust cover the margins. Each line on the page represents part of a life built, and in this case, buried. Detective Lisa Moore leans over the plans, a single desk lamp casting amber light across her notes. Outside, the city of Gary is quiet, streetlights glowing in patches through the office blinds. The hum of an old computer fills the silence. She scrolls through county archives, cross-referencing ownership records with a patience that borders on obsession. At the top of the digital document, a name appears, faded type, from a 1950s deed transfer. Edward J. Caro, property 847 Monroe Street, filed September 12, 1956. Moore reads it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. The garage was his. Edward Caro, age 52 in 1956. Occupation, foreman at the Gary Shipyard, the same facility where Samuel Ryley had worked his final shift. She digs deeper. Employment files show that Samuel had reported directly to Caro on the production floor. Performance reviews mention Samuel as skilled, punctual, reserved, but in the notes margin of one quarterly report, in faded pencil, a single line stands out: tension with foreman, disagreement over operations. Moore leans back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. So they clashed, she murmurs. And months later, one's missing, and the other sells his property and vanishes. Case file, 1956. Detective Harold Finch had interviewed Edward Caro 3 weeks after Samuel disappeared. The transcript is brittle, half-faded, but Moore reads the scrawl anyway. Finch: when did you last see Mr. Ryley? Caro: at the yard, day before he went missing. Good worker, quiet man. Finch: any disagreements? Caro: none worth remembering. Then the interview ends abruptly. No follow-up questions, no home search. Caro was respected, middle management, untouchable by small-town standards. 3 months later, he sold the house, the garage, and every trace of his presence in Gary, moved to Detroit, no forwarding address. Moore flips through the pages, the pattern crystallizing in her mind. He didn't leave after the disappearance because he was grieving, she thinks. He left because he was finished. By morning, she's on a plane to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where Caro's grandson, Michael Caro, age 62, has agreed to speak with her. The interview takes place in a modest suburban home lined with framed photographs of family picnics and graduations. On a shelf above the television sits a small black and white portrait of a stern-faced man in a work shirt, Edward Caro. Michael looks at it as he begins to speak. My grandfather was a hard man, not cruel exactly, just closed off. He worked with his hands, didn't talk much. After Grandma died, he lived alone most of his life. Moore nods. Do you know anything about his time in Gary? Michael hesitates. Only bits. My dad said Grandpa left there suddenly. He'd built the house himself, but one day he packed up, sold it, and moved to Michigan. Said the town changed after the war. He leans back, searching his memory. When I was a kid, he had this rule: no one was allowed in the garage, ever. He said the floor was dangerous, that it could collapse. Even after he got too old to drive, he'd lock it. The smell of oil and concrete was so strong, you couldn't breathe in there for long. Moore writes that down. He mentioned anything about a man named Samuel Ryley? Michael shakes his head. No, but my grandmother once told me something strange. She said he'd done something he could never undo. Said he poured his sin into the ground. He looks uneasy, eyes darting back to his grandfather's photo. I thought she meant that metaphorically. Guess maybe not. Back in Gary, Moore cross-references construction permits from 1956. There it is again, the same line she's already seen in the archives, now glowing on the high-resolution scan of the city's microfilm. Permit Mauer 4317. Foundation reinforcement, 847 Monroe Street. Date approved, October 3rd, 1956. No inspection record, no sign-off. It was Caro's final act before leaving town. Moore spreads the evidence out across the investigation board. Samuel's disappearance, August 14th, 1956. Permit to reinforce the garage, October 3rd. Property sold and vacated, December 1956. She circles the dates in red marker, connecting them with thin lines of twine until the pattern is undeniable. Caro didn't just reinforce a foundation, he sealed a grave. Detective Crane enters the room, carrying a file from the lab. Got the first DNA results back from the site, he says. Moore looks up. From the trunk? Yeah. The sample from that tin photo had partial degradation, but the dog tag residue? It's gold. They're running it against public genealogical databases now. Moore stares at the photos, pinned to the board, the smiling face of Samuel Ryley beside the cold, hollow eyes of Edward Caro. DNA, she says quietly. It'll speak louder than his silence. Crane nods. And when it does, she exhales. We'll finally hear what the concrete's been trying to tell us. The scene fades to black and white archival footage of Gary's industrial past. Smokestacks, shipyard cranes, men in grease-stained uniforms. The narrator's voice slides over the images. For 70 years, Edward Caro's secret lay sealed beneath 11 feet of concrete. He thought he could bury guilt, but guilt, like pressure, always finds a crack. Cut to the Ryley RMA under floodlights, the last of the dirt being brushed away. Moore's voice returns, quiet and sure. He thought concrete could hide guilt. It only protected evidence. The lab smelled faintly of metal, antiseptic, and something older, like dust that had waited too long to be disturbed. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed a steady note, cold and constant. On a stainless steel tray lay a collection of bones, cleaned, labeled, and laid out with the reverence of ancient relics. Detective Lisa Moore stood behind the observation glass, notebook in hand. She wasn't looking at the scientists or the instruments. Her eyes were fixed on the bones themselves, trying to imagine the man they once formed, the man who'd vanished with his car and his name in 1956. Beside the femur, a corroded cluster of upholstery nails lay rusted together, still gripping threads of decayed leather. The forensic team believed they'd been lodged into the seat frame that once pressed against the victim's spine. Dr. Patricia Hale, lead forensic pathologist, adjusted her glasses and pointed to a fractured section of skull. You see this break? Linear fracture, clean edge, no splintering. That tells us it happened at or near the time of death, not post-mortem. Force from above and behind. Blunt instrument, heavy, metallic. Moore nodded. Like a wrench. Hale met her gaze. Exactly like a wrench. Industrial grade, the kind used in a shipyard. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that settles when a mystery finally stops resisting. A technician entered with a printed sheet of DNA analysis. Hale took it, eyes scanning quickly before looking up. "We have confirmation." Moore felt her pulse tighten. "Samuel Ryley?" Hale nodded once. 100% matched to his surviving niece, Evelyn Parker. Sample came from a molar preserved inside the jawbone. "It's him." For a moment, Moore just stared at the tray. The facts she'd chased across 70 years had finally taken physical form. Samuel wasn't a missing person anymore. He was evidence, human, tangible, and heartbreakingly real. She whispered under her breath, "Welcome home, Mr. Ryley." That afternoon, Evelyn Parker sat across from Moore in the station conference room. She was in her late 60s, silver hair pulled back neatly, hands trembling slightly as she held a photo of the uncle she'd never met. "My father told me stories about him," she said softly. "Said Uncle Samuel used to drive that car up to our house when I was a baby. He'd honk twice so my dad would carry me outside. He never came after that summer. My grandmother never stopped waiting." Moore slid the lab photo across the table, the Ryley RMA under floodlights, half exhumed, half reborn. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but her jaw set with quiet strength. "So, it was him all along," she said. "The car, the garage, all those years right under our feet." Moore nodded. "We can finally prove what happened. He didn't leave his family. He didn't run away." Evelyn exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the image. "Then he can finally rest. And so can she." Back at headquarters, Moore pinned new evidence photos on the board. Beneath Samuel's portrait, she added the close-up of the wrench fractures from the skull. The crime had come into focus, not through testimony or confession, but through the quiet precision of bones. The motive had taken longer to find. It arrived not from the crime scene, but from the archives of the Gary shipyard itself. Among faded payroll ledgers from 1956, investigators discovered discrepancies, employee names duplicated, wages rerouted through falsified accounts. Internal notes stamped confidential referenced an anonymous complaint filed that summer by S. Ryley. It accused Edward Caro, the foreman, of running a smuggling and payroll theft ring, siphoning steel parts, and falsifying hours for profit. The complaint had been dismissed. No supporting witnesses, no paper trail. But Caro would have known exactly who had reported him. Moore stared at the evidence, her mind piecing together what must have happened. Samuel, the quiet machinist who'd survived war, had stood up to corruption at home. Caro, facing exposure, chose silence over consequence. Reconstruction, August 14, 1956. Samuel leaves the shipyard after his shift. Caro follows him under the pretense of wanting to talk things through. Maybe he invites him to the garage, says he has something to show him. The Ryley pulls in, engine still warm. Inside, words are exchanged, anger builds. A wrench, always within reach of a foreman, becomes the final word. One blow to the head, then another. Silence. Caro, panicked but methodical, moves the body into the driver's seat, wraps the headrest in a tarp to absorb the blood. The next day, he orders concrete, claiming foundation repairs. He pours his guilt into the ground, one wheelbarrow at a time. Weeks later, he moves to Michigan and never looks back. In the present, Moore stands over the lab tray again, her reflection shimmering faintly on the steel surface. She imagines Samuel's last moments, the confusion, the betrayal, the darkness that followed. "He survived one war," she murmurs, "only to be silenced in another, the kind fought in back rooms and time cards." Hale looks up from her notes. "You think Caro acted alone?" Moore shakes her head slowly. Men like him rarely do, but he was the one with the keys, the one who signed the permit, the one who thought concrete would make him immortal. She closes the case file with quiet finality. It made Samuel immortal instead. Cut to an archival montage, shipyard cranes loading steel, men in sweat-stained overalls, a photo of Samuel laughing with coworkers, the Ryley RMA gliding down an open road. The narrator's voice fades in. The bones told their story in silence. Every fracture, every mark, a word in a language that time could not erase. 70 years later, the truth finally had a name, and it demanded to be heard. The flashbulbs came first, blinding bursts of light bouncing off a row of microphones. The conference room at Gary Police Headquarters was filled to capacity, every seat taken by reporters, camera crews, and townspeople who'd lived long enough to remember the day Samuel Ryley vanished. Detective Lisa Moore stood at the podium, papers neatly stacked before her. Though she didn't need them, she knew the story by heart, the facts etched into her mind like names carved in stone. Behind her hung two photographs, one of Samuel Ryley, smiling beside his car in 1956, the other the Ryley RMA itself, freshly restored and gleaming under museum lights. She adjusted the microphone. The murmur in the room softened. After 70 years, she began, her voice steady. We can finally say the name of the man responsible for the disappearance and murder of Korean War veteran Samuel Ryley. The crowd leaned forward. Evidence recovered from the excavation site at 847 Monroe Street confirms that Samuel Ryley was killed in August 1956 by his foreman, Edward J. Caro. The remains found beneath the buried Ryley RMA were conclusively identified through DNA analysis. The cause of death, blunt force trauma, consistent with a heavy industrial tool, matches forensic evidence from the recovered remains. Flashbulbs went off again, rapid fire. Moore continued without looking up. Caro poured a second concrete foundation to conceal both the victim and the vehicle, falsified a construction permit to disguise his actions, and left Gary, Indiana, for Michigan shortly after the murder. He lived out the rest of his life free from suspicion, but today, we correct the record. Samuel Ryley did not abandon his family. He was taken from them. She paused, letting the words settle. To his surviving relatives, and to every veteran whose story went unheard, we see you, and we remember. At her side, Lake County Prosecutor James Weller stepped forward, face solemn, voice echoing against the walls. Justice delayed, he said, is not justice denied. He looked out at the crowd. For decades, the truth slept beneath concrete, but science and persistence made it speak again. A few reporters lowered their cameras. It no longer felt like a press event. It felt like a eulogy. That weekend, Gary's downtown streets filled with the low rumble of engines. Veterans groups and classic car collectors organized a memorial drive in Samuel's honor. Dozens of vintage cars, polished chrome gleaming beneath an overcast sky. At the front of the procession was the restored Ryley RMA, its burgundy and black body immaculate once more, its engine tuned to the same soft purr it had carried through the 1950s. Evelyn Parker, Samuel's niece, sat in the passenger seat beside Detective Moore, who drove slowly through the streets. Crowds lined the sidewalks, waving small flags and holding handwritten signs. Welcome home, Samuel. Never forgotten. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she whispered, he's finally getting his ride home. The car's final destination was the Gary Historical Museum, where a permanent exhibit had been built in record time. Inside, under controlled light and glass panels, the Ryley RMA rested like a monument. Beside it, A mannequin dressed in Samuel's restored army uniform stood proudly at attention, his service medals gleaming. On the opposite wall hung two photographs, one of the smiling young veteran beside his car, and another of the excavation site where the same vehicle emerged from 11 feet of concrete. Beneath them, a plaque read, Samuel Ryley, 1928 1956, Korean War veteran, machinist, whistleblower, son, brother, and hero. The car that carried him away finally brought him home. Visitors moved through quietly. Some left flowers, others touched the glass. Even the children seemed to understand that this wasn't just about a car, it was about remembrance, the kind of justice that doesn't fade with time. Later that evening, Moore stood alone in the museum, the crowd long gone. The Ryley sat before her, bathed in soft amber light. Dust motes floated in the air, the same way they had in the garage where it had been buried. Only this time they danced in peace, not secrecy. She traced her fingers lightly along the polished hood. "You're free now," she whispered. "You can rest." The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence like a steady heartbeat. Cut to the outside of 847 Monroe Street, now an empty lot marked by a simple memorial plaque. The night wind moved through the grass, the faint hum of distant traffic replacing the silence that had once hung heavy over the buried concrete. The narrator's voice returns, measured, reverent, final. For 70 years, that garage kept its secret. Concrete preserved guilt as perfectly as it preserved truth. But the truth does what it always does. It rises, a slow zoom on the plaque. On this site, in March 2024, investigators discovered the remains of Samuel Ryley, a veteran who died standing for honesty and justice. His courage outlasted time. The camera tilts upward toward the night sky, the faint reflection of city lights glowing like candle flames against the clouds. Moore's closing narration fades in over the final montage, the restored Ryley RMA under museum lights, the memorial drive rolling into the distance, Evelyn placing a hand on her uncle's photograph. The car that carried him away finally brought him home. And for the first time in 70 years, the garage stood silent, not from secrets, but from peace. The camera glides slowly across the museum floor. Reflections of warm light ripple over the restored Ryley RMA, its paint flawless again, deep burgundy, trimmed in chrome that catches the glow like liquid silver. The engine hums softly, idling for the first time in 70 years, the sound low and steady, like a heartbeat returned to the world. A single spotlight rests on the hood ornament, the elegant R that once cut through wind and darkness. Around it, quiet fills the gallery. Visitors move in reverent silence, their footsteps echoing softly against marble floors. Every brick, every bolt, every inch of soil remembers. Time may cover the past in dust and concrete, but truth has a way of finding its voice, even if it takes a lifetime. The camera pans toward the display beside the car, Samuel's photograph, smiling in his uniform. His story no longer ends in question marks, but in closure. Cold cases aren't about crime. They're about people, about courage, about those who stood for what was right and those who refused to stop searching. The porch light Eleanor Ryley once kept burning, Detective Moore at the memorial plaque, veterans saluting as the classic cars pass by. The hum of the Ryley's engine fades into a gentle instrumental theme. If stories like this remind you that truth endures, the voice concludes softly, share this video, because remembrance is its own kind of justice.